Hi folks, and welcome back to Meaningful Money. Okay, back here in my office for the second half of my interview with Justin Urquhart Stewart, an exclusive interview, no less. Justin, as I mentioned last time, is one of the founders and the marketing director for 7 Investment Management, whose logo appears down here in the bottom right of the screen of every Meaningful Money video since episode 100, because they sponsor me here, for which I'm extremely grateful to them. So we're going to carry on with the interview with Justin, picking up where we finished last time. Justin, can you explain briefly what QE is, quantitative easing, and how it works, or how, at least perhaps how it should work?
Well, quantitative easing is a mechanism by which the government, via the Bank of England, can actually put money into the system. What it is doing, in effect, is issuing gilts and then buying them. Rather strangely at the moment, the biggest purchaser of government gilts is the Bank of England. But what it's doing is putting money into the banking system. And the whole idea originally was to A, stabilise the banks, and then also make sure that the banks had enough capital, and therefore to ensure that they started lending. And what happened? They didn't. But that's history, we know that. This latest round that they're talking about is trying to put more money directly into the system so that banks do lend with some level of compulsion to do so. But that's going to be an interesting issue as to how they're actually going to try and manage that. Time then for some more imagination, I would like to think, from the government to come up with better ideas to how you get money into the system. First of all, you have to help by creating demand, because otherwise it's all very well putting money into the system and saying people are going to borrow it. That's like pushing on a piece of string. You also need someone to pull the string the other end. You need demand that end. So that's in terms of government investment, in terms of construction. That can be done through local authorities and local authority pensions, through forms of things like stamp duty, which we've discussed before, and in terms of smaller company incentives to help companies get going with those guarantees. So there are all sorts of elements that can be done to try and encourage more money into the system. But quantitative easing is the government's way of actually trying to make sure that rates stay low, that there's as much money as possible in there, and the banks remain as secure as possible. The bad news with it is, of course, the returns you've been seeing, the yields on gilts, are at record lows, and therefore the returns on pensions at the moment are absolutely appalling. So people getting annuity rates, or actually just getting ordinary rates they wish to live on, finding it really very difficult indeed. And of course, in terms of deposit rates, they're also very poor. So it's a difficult period, but one that has to happen at the moment in order to try and make sure we get more stability. But we still need to try and focus on getting growth in the economy as well.
Okay, now when I obviously have this conversation with clients often, particularly those at retirement and you know their pensions yielding much less than perhaps they were expecting. But one of the questions that I get asked all the time is, how come we're printing all this money and yet inflation is coming down? Because you know we're all taught at school about, as you've already mentioned, the Weimar Republic, and perhaps more recently in Zimbabwe. You know, these pictures of people turning up to buy bread with wheelbarrows of banknotes. Why is there any danger? Obviously not of that. I think that's probably a bit extreme. But is there any danger that this continuing quantitative easing can be inflationary, and why is it not happening now?
Pete, that's a really good point, because potentially it is inflationary for all those reasons you've just said. You know, you pump that money in, whether you're going back to the Spanish Armada, bringing gold back into Europe. If you put more money into the system like that, it can be potentially inflationary, so long as there's demand. If you're dealing with weak demand at the moment, you're just pushing money in there, but it's not being pulled out the other end. If we start seeing a rise in demand of any size, then that is potentially inflationary. The question is when? And I believe it is inflationary, but not yet. So therefore, we need to keep a very weather eye on this. Inflation pressures at the moment are low. In fact, the Bank of England is probably more worried about getting into deflation. What they want to have is a reasonable amount of inflation, which in their view is about 2 to 3%, something like that. Deflation would potentially mean that, oh heaven forfend, we might be looking a bit like Japan, who went through 2 decades of trying to get out of deflation, hasn't really got out of it even yet, and found itself in a very difficult situation indeed. So it's that careful balancing act. Yes, it's potentially inflationary, but not yet until we get demand sorted out. When does demand come back? Well, when you get that one word that is so vital to any economy, confidence. Bring back the confidence and then you'll find there's more demand. But that's not there yet. And we need some politicians to take some actions on that. Some with some imagination, please.
Not sure I'd want to be a central banker right now or a politician, but that's, to be honest, that's true. I'd never ever want to be a politician. So, you know, banks have had a bad reputation with very, very good reason. It seems like it's one scandal after another at the moment. But we need them, don't we?
We do need banks, but we also need new types of banks. One of the things that we've discussed before is why didn't we have a national investment bank? For instance, a large bank that was around the country that we'd use to invest in, one like Royal Bank of Scotland. Good heavens, we've already got one that we own just about all of. We could have done a lot with that already. But there are other things we can do. The new peer-to-peer banking mechanisms whereby people can put money into a system and then allow people to draw out the other end on the internet. So you've got these for deposit accounts, so they're unregulated really at the moment, but these are beginning to develop, almost creating local investment funds for local companies. In many ways going back to the regional stock exchanges. Remember, we had 45 stock exchanges in 1945 precisely to do that for regional monies. Now, why can't we do that electronically with the internet? That takes a sort of initiative, A, from the banks, which you probably won't get, but certainly from the government to try and actually foster and develop these things more. Sadly, my concern with the politicians at the moment is, A, I know it's an old-fashioned line, but they've never had a job, or more to the point, never been in business, albeit the Chancellor has some cursory connection with a wallpaper company. But my big worry is actually in the Treasury. I can't find anyone there other than the mandarins who've actually got more than 5 or 6 years worth of experience. So understanding business and understand how the economy works. So we need some dynamic leadership here to be able to actually get the economy going, as opposed to politicians who seem to be playing politics.
I'm pleased to say I don't remember all those stock markets in 1945, but it might be helpful if there were some in the powers that be that did, like you say. Finally, Justin, do you have one message for ordinary people who are watching this, who struggle to understand the news reports, or perhaps are sort of concerned when they hear them? What's your message to ordinary people investing ordinary amounts of money at the moment?
Well, first of all, don't get scared by the headlines. Take a step back and look at the bigger picture overall. The global economy is still growing, albeit slower. The issues we have to face in America are going to be the slowdown there, and therefore they're going to have to address their debt and deficit issue. But they are consummate capitalists. They will find a way through that. I have some confidence. The Eurozone is slowly finding a way of resolving its problems. It's going to take time, but we'll finally get there. The China is slowing down. Is it a bubble? No, it's more like a bar of aero, lots of little bubbles, some will go off, but not the whole thing. The United Kingdom, we're in a position now where we've got very little growth, but we will start having some coming back, particularly if we had some political initiatives. So, number one, to all investors, don't panic. Number two, make sure that you've got your proper financial plan in place for the longer term. Make sure you're sitting there with Pete and his team and who actually give you that one word you need in an economy like this: confidence, so that your family, your finances are all in clear view and carefully planned for the next few decades, irrespective of what our politicians fail to do.
Justin, sir, you are a legend. Thank you very, very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Pete, anytime. Good luck.